What is going on, my LifeTac family? It's so great to see you guys again. Today we're going to be working on a 2008 Crown Vic, and the intake manifold is cracked, so we're going to be working on taking it off, replacing it with the new one. And this car specifically has a lot of rust inside the radiator, so we're going to pretty much just flush it out with some water, get most of the rust out as we can. Just wait until the water comes out clear and begin the process. So let's do it. So the first thing that we did was removed the intake hose here. So it's just 2/8, one here, one here. Can't really see that in the corner there, can you? One here and one there. Take off the two hoses in the back side of it right here. This is going to be one hose, and the other one is going to be right beneath it. Just go ahead and pull those out, and they come out no problem at all. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And then the first thing, well, first things first actually, the weep hole, or the hole to drain the coolant, is right there, right underneath the passenger side or the driver's side. Right there, that's where you drain out all your coolant if you have rust in there, and you can go ahead and just keep flushing it out with water until it comes out clean. Okay, now the next thing that you have to do is remove the two bolts for the EGR. It's going to be two 10mm. Pull that out, and this comes right out. There's going to be a gasket on there. In my instance, this one's stuck onto the throttle body, so I don't have to worry about that. And then you're going to pull out your hoses here. These are some vacuum lines. Pull those out. So the idea is we're going to move the throttle body out of the way. And so we have a EGR vacuum solenoid here. Take off the 10 stud, little 10 stud, and then the vacuum line here for the PCV valve. Pull that one out, so that we basically have some room to lift this up and out. So the next step here is take off the throttle body connector and this connector here. So this one just has a tab, you push on the back, pull it out. This one also has a tab in the middle, push that, pull it out. So there's nothing binding. Okay, so once you have all those connections out and mostly all of the vacuum lines off, you're going to want to take off the bolts that hold in the throttle body. It's going to be 5 8mm bolts. One here, one on the back side here, one here, and then there's another one right there. So these two are right next to each other, that one, and the throttle body should come right up. So once you have all those connections off, you can pretty much just go ahead and lift this up and out of here. I'm gonna disconnect the vacuum solenoid back here. There's a connection on that, and this should be able to make sure that you're not breaking or putting any stress on any cables or anything like that. And this just folds out just like that, out of the way of the manifold here. And the next thing that you have to do is remove this bracket that holds in the manifold and the alternator itself. Those are going to be 4 8mm bolts. So once you have those off, which I have already taken off, pull off our wire harness connector here. We can go ahead and remove the bracket for that. Okay. There is going to be a PCV hose that's connected to the top side of the valve cover that kind of just goes over and connects to the throttle body. You can just pull this right out so it's out of your way. Okay, so the next things that we're going to have to do is basically take off anything that is connected to the intake the manifold here so that we can get ready to start taking this guy off. First thing I'm going to start taking off is the thermostat housing. That looks like it's going to be a 10 millimeter. Go ahead and break that loose. Take off the bolts. Okay, I already drained the coolant, so there shouldn't be much that comes off of here. The new manifold is going to come with a new thermostat, so we can throw all this stuff away here. Okay, if you have rust inside of your radiator, or if you see rust in the thermostat or even the coolant housing, it's a good idea to take off the coolant housing, or the thermostat housing, I'm sorry, and just go ahead and pour water in there if you don't have a hose handy, which I'm sure most of you will, because you'll probably be doing this at home if you're watching this video. Go ahead and just pour out your gallon of water, and as you can see, it'll be coming out nice and rusty. You want to keep doing this until your water comes out clear. Once the water comes out clear, then you could pretty much have cleared out most of the rust inside the manifold and the coolant passages. If you have a hose, this will be a lot easier and be a lot quicker, but I don't, so I'm doing it like this. Just keep on pouring. Keep on pouring, keep on pouring, keep on pouring until the water comes out clear. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this EGR bracket here. It's going to be two 8 millimeter bolts. That's one, and the other one is right about there. These two bolts are connected to the intake manifold, so they must come out. Okay, the next step is to take off this bracket here. This bracket here is going to be one 13 millimeter and then a 15 millimeter on the back side back here. Right on the bottom side down there. It has a stud on it. Everyone says that this is the hardest one, but if you have a gear wrench with a flex head similar to this, then it should not be a problem. Okay, it's actually a 13 millimeter, so you use a 13 gear wrench flex head if you have one. If you don't, you can get it with a regular wrench, but it'll just take a little bit more time. This is a 2008. It should be not that bad, so I can get my hand in here with the wrench around it and I can break it loose. And once you turn it loose, you can move it with your hands like so. And make sure you don't drop that nut. We got it out. Take the top off here. Okay, for that bracket, it's actually going to be a 13 nut that holds on the bracket stud, and then the stud is a 15 millimeter, so it is correct. It is a little bit hard. It takes some time, so you just got to get in there, crank it loose, and then just keep working at it so you can take off this bracket right here. Alright guys, finally got that bracket out. It only took me about 15 to 20 minutes. There's another bracket on the back side of it. see that bracket right there with that bolt that's turned out? That bracket is actually holding in the stud that holds on the bracket that we just took off. So you gotta loosen that 13mm stud right there, and then this bracket will come off the stud, and you can take out the 15mm stud that holds on this pain in the butt bracket right here. So now we can get to the fun stuff and start removing the fuel rail here, and then the ignition coils, and be ready to take off the intake manifold. Next step here, fuel rail. We're going to take off the fuel rail with the only thing that holds it in is, let's see, 4 8mm studs. You got to use a deep socket. Let's go ahead and remove those. So we're going to do that for all 4. One here, one here, one here, and one here. Okay, once you take off all 4 of the bolts, you're going to want to disconnect the fuel injector connectors for all 8 of them. Just pull the tab, pull them out, pull the tab, pull them out, tab, they all come out. It's going to be pretty, the actual tabs to remove the injectors are really brittle and they're going to break. So don't really worry about it. You can plug them back on without having any issues. But mine's brittle and they're all breaking, so that's not an issue. Okay. Now that we have all of our fuel injector connectors disconnected, you can go ahead and start pulling the injectors up. Just give a little tug, you pull up, they'll come out. Tug, one by one. And as you can see, they're coming up. Just give a nice little tug. Make sure you're holding the injector when you pull up on them. A little bit of gas will come out. Don't really worry about it. The O-ring for this one came out, so you have to make sure that you don't lose those, or else when you put it back on, it will leak. So it's very important that you are observant enough to see that these O-rings are coming off if they do. So pull up on the last one here, and all of our injector rail is basically off here. Get this, give this a little bit of slack so we can come up. And just kind of pull it out and under the EGR here. We're going to disconnect this coolant temp sensor connector here so it's out of the way. And this should be ready to come out here. The last fuel injector right here gave me a little bit of trouble taking it off, so I just pulled the injector out of the rail, and this should be able to come out here, slide out. And once it's off, you can just fold this over right here like that, out of the way. And now we have access to the manifold. So the only things that are connected to it are the bolts that are holding it in and the ignition coils. So we're gonna have to remove all 8 ignition coils, and then we can remove the bolts, and the intake manifold's coming right out. For the bolts here, the ignition coil plugs, there's the tabs on the bottom. Push the tabs on the bottom, pull them off. Tab on the bottom, pull them off. And then the bolts that are holding in the ignition coils are 7 mils. So take off the 7 mils and it should be able to come right out. Alright, so we got all the ignition coils out. So those are out. The only thing that's really holding in the rest that's holding us up is this heater hose connection here. So it's just one hose clamp. Go ahead and clamp that. Pull it up. The hose clamp's right here, so I'm kind of in the way of doing that, so I'm going to take it off and then show you guys what's next. Okay, got the hose off. There's this guy right here. So now you have 9 or 10 millimeter bolts that hold in the manifold. So we're going to go ahead and take those guys off. On the other side here, you can see that there's bolts there along the sides. And then this should be ready to come out. Just show you guys a few of them coming out. That's one. Here's two. And they're going to go all the way around. And this guy should be ready to come out. Okay. So got all the bolts out. All the, I think it's 8 or 9 10 millimeter bolts. And as you can see here, our manifold is loose. And we should be able to lift this out. Let's take off our alternator connector here. Okay, let's try to leave that one on. All right, let me get some pliers here and take it off. So it makes it easier to take off the alternator connector so it's not in the way. And then we can lift this up here. Okay. Alternator probably needs to come off because it is in the way of the manifold here. So we're going to take off the alternator. That's probably the first thing we should do, or you should do, is take off the alternator. Make sure you disconnect the negative battery terminal. Okay, in order to take off the negative, or not make sure you move the negative battery terminal before you mess with any electrical circuits. This is going to be the tensioner right there. It's a 1/2 inch drive. So what you're going to do is take your 1/2 inch drive. We're going to put it on down here. And you're going to tension that down. And as you can see here, I need a hand. Let me try to do this one-handed. Take off the belt, okay. And once you take off the belt, you can remove the alternator. Alternator is going to be 2 10 millimeter bolts. That's what it looks like. And then the connector here. Connector is going to be also a 10 millimeter bolt. So I'm going to do that real quick and then we'll finish the video. Okay, I left my connector on there just you don't have to take it off. You can remove the alternator and just set it aside. So now we have access to the intake manifold here. Finally. I hope I have everything off. You gotta double check and make sure there's nothing else connected to it. There is a harness that's connected on the back of it. You can just pull it up. And the manifold is off. Remove your gaskets. And then once you have the manifold off, it's a great idea to cover up the cylinder holes with some paper towels so nothing else gets in there. Once you have all the holes covered, just go ahead and take a razor blade and start cleaning the surface, the mating surface of the manifold and the block. Just get all this crud out of here. You want to make it as clean as possible. Why not, right? Since we're already here. See how clean that portion is already? So go ahead and clean the entire mating surface and be ready to install the new manifold. Alright, we got our mating surfaces cleaned, and now we're ready to take out your blockages. Just go ahead and take out all of your napkins. Now we're ready to install our intake manifold here. Let's go ahead and just place it. This one actually comes with gaskets already, so you don't need to put on the old gasket. So these ones, you can just go ahead and place this one on top. Okay, nice and in place. Line that up right there and go ahead and install all of your bolts. Someone mentioned that there's numbers on the bolt ports in different fashion. They say these are tightening sequence. I'm not exactly sure if that's true, but it doesn't hurt to go ahead and try and follow it. Really, it doesn't matter which way you tighten them. Just make sure that they're all tightened. I don't believe that is a tightening sequence because the number 3 bolt is the bolt for the bracket. And as long as you just tighten them all across evenly, you should be okay. Just make sure you get them all tight down. Don't tighten them super tight, you might crack the intake manifold, but just tight enough. When tightening down all of the intake bolts, I like to use a 50-75-100 method. So tighten them down 50% all, and then 75%, and then 100%. Just so you can ensure that they are all securely fastened down, all at the same torque. And you will be just fine. Okay, once you have all your intake manifold bolts, you're gonna have the third one, this back one right back here. It's gonna be missing because you're gonna tighten down your bracket after it's done. So you're gonna wait for that one to be last, and then next we're gonna go ahead and fasten in the heater hose connection here. All right, now that your heater hose is connected and all your manifold bolts are tightened down, we can go ahead and put back our fuel rail. Just take it over from where it was hanging off the side, and you can place this in here. Well, actually, before we do that, it's probably a good idea to put back our other 3 injectors that we have missing. Okay, before you put everything or your fuel injectors back in, it's a good idea to clean the O-ring here and lube it with some oil or some WD-40 so that when you put it back in, it doesn't cut the O-ring and it starts to leak everywhere. So let's go ahead and clean up these guys, and both sides. You want to lube both sides and then put them back in. You're ready to install the fuel rail. Alright, so I got a little bit of oil in a cap here. So what you're going to do is just going to put your finger and just rub it just along the edges here, just so that you can lubricate the O-ring surfaces. And do that for all 8 of them. The ones that are already on the rail, you don't have to worry about the top, but just do it for the bottom one that goes inside the intake manifold. Okay, now we got all of our injectors lubed up. Remember the last one was the one that was giving us trouble coming out because it was in the way. We're gonna just go ahead and put that one in first, and then you can install your injector rail make sure you place them all perfectly in the holes and just wiggle them around until they all fall into place. Make sure nothing else is holding it up. And once it's all in, make sure you just press them all down. Make sure that they all get pressed on. The injector rail is installed, and then install your 4 bolts that hold in the injector rail. Bolts are going to look just like this. That guy right there. Okay, once you got the rail in, just go ahead and plug in all your injector connectors. Make sure that they are the same ones as the injector itself and not mix it up for the ignition coil plugs. Okay, now your injector rail is in. We're gonna install our crappy bracket here, the hard one that was a pain in the butt to take out. So we're gonna go ahead and place it in here.
That was beautiful. Can you repeat that one more time? $1,287.03. Nancy, you are $1,287.
Okay, so once you have it in place, we'll get your long stud, place it in here so it'll hold it in place, and then you can install the back 15 stud bolt, this guy right here. Okay, one thing that I would advise that you do before installing your fuel injector rail is go ahead and install your ignition coils first before you put in the fuel rail. It'll make it a lot easier. And the new Dorman manifold will come with new bolts. They're a coarse thread that goes into the plastic because the new Dorman manifold doesn't come with the threads for the old screws. So you're gonna have to just rethread those with the new coarse screws. Okay, now that we got all of our ignition coils in, let's go ahead and put this back on here and plug all of our ignition coils back in. Okay, now that those are all plugged in, you can go ahead and put on our throttle body here. So we'll just go ahead and bring it back over. Make sure this is clean. Bring it back over and just place it right on top of that port. And match it up with your EGR. Should go just like that. There's going to be a spacer on the old one. You don't need to put in the old spacer because this one already has all the gaskets on it. So now that we got that on, we can go ahead and put in your EGR bolts. So there's 2 10s on the EGR bolts, on the EGR. Once those are threaded in, you can just go ahead and use whatever tool you have to tighten them up. Alright, once you have the throttle body in place and the EGR connected, you can go ahead and insert your 5 bolts that you used to tighten down the throttle body. So you got your 5 bolts, tighten that down, and then plug everything back together. All the EGR, you got your hose connections over here, your vacuum lines, connect all that stuff. These hoses up here, definitely you got to connect all that stuff, or else you're going to have codes and vacuum leaks. Alright, now that we got the intake manifold all buttoned up, we got all of our connections, our vacuum lines and connectors connected, we're going to install our thermostat that came with the manifold itself. Assuming that goes on here like this. Spacer, huh? We'll go ahead and put our gasket in there. Place our thermostat in there like so. Our metal spacer here, and then just go ahead and button that right up, just like that. The new manifold came with 2 drain, I guess you would say drain ports, or not drain ports, but bleeder valve ports. So we'll go ahead and screw those in. One goes here and the other one goes right here, right behind the thermostat housing. They are Allen heads. So we'll go ahead, we'll leave these open for now until we are pretty much ready to add coolant. Okay, so we just installed our hose. We got to install our alternator back. That pretty much concludes the alternator, the intake manifold for the 2008 Crown Vic. This was a pretty long video, but I tried to get as many details and all the little nicks and knacks to help you guys get the job done when you need it. So if this video helped you in any way, shape, or form, please comment, like, and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and have a great day. We'll see you guys on the next one.